We are starting a little short, a 4-week teaching series. Again, if you want the notes from today, you can scan the QR code. And I'm entitling it Understanding the Times. And the tag on it is simply this: responding with the good news of Jesus to the world in which we lived. So, if I was to say, all right, I'm going to give you an assignment right now, I want you to think of one word that describes the times in which we live. And you were to write it down. I wonder what your response would be. Scary? Everything that's happening globally, internationally? Chaotic? Frustrating? Angry? With all the things that's going on? Exciting? Opportunities coming up? Or maybe you're like, I have no opinion, I don't watch the news, I don't care. That's possible. When we look to understand the times, I did a little survey, quick survey of everything that's happened since 2010. That's only 13 years. Do you realize what's happened in the last 10 to 13 years? It's crazy. 2010, there was an earthquake in Haiti. You guys remember that? The volcano in Iceland, right? Changed air travel all over the world. Explosion of the Deepwater oil rig, biggest oil spill in history. There's a movie made out of that one. 2011 was a Japanese earthquake, second worst nuclear accident in history. 2012 was Superstorm Sandy. I was living in New Jersey at the time. The eye of that went right over our house. Marijuana was legalized in 2 states. The Sandy Hook shooting, remember all that, right? Boston Marathon bombing was in 2013. Black Lives Matter began. ISIS began its rise to power in 2014. 2015, 2 terrorist attacks in Paris. Same-sex marriage was legalized in the U.S. And look at 16, 17, 18. 50 killed in a nightclub attack, 58 killed in a music festival attack, 17 killed in a Parkland school shooting. 2019, the scandal of rich people bribing to get kids into college. 2020, COVID. We could just put that alone, right? The whole George Floyd, everything that happened, the vaccine mandates in 2021, last year the Ukraine invasion, runaway inflation, Roe versus Wade overturned. And that's just a sample. That doesn't even include things like immigration and wars and revolutions and all those other stuff. And here's why I wanted to do this survey, this 4-week series. Every single person has an opinion on all of that. Did you? All of you. Some of you might have no opinion, but most people lean one way or the other. And we have opinions on these things. We have opinions on matters that are happening. And consider that there are lots of people that think we have a significant problem with the next generation, right? Anybody under 20 agree? Anybody over 70 disagree? Okay, so this is not new. Young people think they know everything and they're always quite sure about it, right? Right? We've heard that. The free access which many people have to romance has poisoned the mind and corrupted the morals of many promising youth. And this other person said, how to bring young people into membership of the church, right? This is a problem. We're losing all of our kids. Was a pressing problem. It was raised at a particular meeting. They're not following into church. Do you know when these were said? The first one was Aristotle. 2,000 years ago. Second one was Enos Hitchcock in 1790. And the last one was in an article written in 1947. Interesting, is it not? So what's really going on? What's the big problem? When we talk about understanding the times as a follower of Jesus, what's supposed to be our concern? Because here's the thing. We are thinking, well, how should I think about these things and how should I respond? How should I feel about everything that's going on? The problem, as we said, is that everybody has an opinion, everybody thinks they know, and everybody is different. And all of us are convinced that our way is the right way. And all your friends, ones that don't know Jesus, are convinced their way is the right way. So what is it? Well, it's a fascinating story, an account in the Old Testament when David became the king of Israel. I got to give you some context for it to understand it. And if you remember the story, if you've ever read through it, David had been chosen by God. And remember, he's anointed as a really young boy, teenager, that he's going to be the next king of Israel. But Saul is the king, but God had rejected Saul. And so David enters the service of the king at a very young age. And he begins to succeed. He's kind of a personal attendant to Saul. he's a musician, and then he has this amazing encounter where he kills Goliath, right? And the Israelite army defeats the Philistines, and he begins to get prominence. And Saul gives him a little more responsibility. He begins to get more famous, and all of a sudden Saul realized David's a threat. He's going to take over my kingdom. And so do you remember what he did, right? He chases him. He says, I'm going to kill him, and David has to go on the run. And for years, he's on the run. He's in the wilderness. He ends up with about 600 men. The Bible talks him as ruffians or troublemakers, kind of gather around David. That's all he's got. And so he spends all these years running around a fugitive. He's got this nomadic life. He's either wandering the wilderness or he's taking shelter with Israel's enemies. And after years of running and being harassed, King Saul died in battle. The one who wanted him dead was now himself dead. And that led to a bit of a problem because David was from the ancestral tribe of Judah in the south. And so after Saul died, his son Ishbosheth, they said, well, the normal thing is we make the son king. And so they made him king of the north. But because David was from the south, Judah said, hold on a second. We've actually supported David a little bit when he was on the run. We want him to be our king. He's the guy who made it all work anyway. And so the kingdom divided. And you had Ishbosheth as a king to the north, and David was the king to the south. And for the next few years, what happened was David started to get stronger and stronger and stronger, and the northern part of the kingdom got weaker and weaker and weaker. And eventually, Ishbosheth was killed, assassinated, by his own people. And the rulers of all these northern tribes said, you know what? We just don't need to do another king. David is the guy. We all know that David is the guy. I mean, David was the one who led our battles. He's the one that's most famous. We want to come and make him king over the whole nation. And the writer of 1 Chronicles details how this happens. It's very interesting. Because it says this. It says, these are the numbers of men armed for battle. In other words, these are the powerful ones, the influencers, who came to David at Hebron to turn Saul's kingdom over to him. In other words, they were saying, all right, it's all going to be yours, David. And then we get into this long list. From Judah, carrying shield and spear, 6,800 men armed for battle. From Simeon, warriors ready for battle, 7,100. From Levi, 4,600, including Jehoiada, the leader of the family of Aaron, with 3,700 men, with 22 officers. And then from Benjamin, Saul's tribe himself, 3,000. Most had been loyal to Saul's house until then, right? From Ephraim, brave warriors, 20,000. From the half-tribe of Manasseh, by name, they came to make David king, 18,000. From Zebulun, 50,000. From Naphtali, 1,000 officers and 37,000 men. From Dan, 28. From Asher, 40. And from the half-tribe of Manasseh, armed with every kind of weapon. From Reuben and Gad, that's the other side of the Jordan River. All these people came to say, all right, David, we're behind you. You're our king. Now, if you're observant, you'll see that I skipped one verse. Because it doesn't fit with all the other verses. It kind of stands out as something different in the midst of all this, and it was significant enough that the chronicler who was putting this whole list together said, I want to highlight these men. And it simply says this in verse 32, from Issachar, which was a tribe way to the north, men who understood the times and knew what Israel should do. 200 chiefs with all the relatives under their command. All these tribes sending thousands and thousands of warriors. And Issachar sent men who understood the times. And they're noted by the author for two reasons, right? And you can see them both. They understood the times. They kind of got what was going on. And secondly, they knew what Israel should do. There was something significant about understanding the times and then connecting that to their actions that made them indispensable to David as the new ruler of the kingdom. I mean, think about it. The world was changing. I mean, David was trying to unite a fragmented kingdom that was not unified up to now. He had to figure out how to make things work with different groups and minorities and tribes and all this stuff. His enemies now saw David as the king, and so there was this new nation state that they were really solidifying, so he had to know when to fight, when to negotiate, when to attack, when to defend. Plus, he was still pretty new at this whole king thing, and he could use people who knew what to do in the culture. And what's interesting is this is not a unique concept to this. It's actually scattered throughout Scripture. Do you know when we went through Esther earlier this year? Do you remember this? Or last year? When the king was trying to figure out what to do, it says, since it was customary for the king to consult with experts in matters of law and justice, he spoke with wise men who understood the times. Interesting. There's something about the wisdom of what to do being connected to what's going on that helps us live. And so here's the main idea that I want to go with for the next 4 weeks. It's simply this. Understanding the times is what helps us effectively respond to the times. Because if we don't understand our culture and its pressures, then we could end up being slaves to our culture. If we don't understand the times, we'll be reactive to everything that's going on. If we don't understand the times, we're going to be always longing for something else and miss what's right in front of us. If we don't understand the times, we risk wasting a lot of time and energy on things that simply don't matter. So what does that mean? Just means watching the news? Well, we're going to take a look at this. What does it mean to understand the times? And as I went through this, there's a few different things that I think are really critical, because if you were to talk about the times of today, if you were to say, look, I want to understand the times, or I do understand the times, what would you say are the biggest issues of our day? I mean, if you do a survey and ask people, what are they? They're things like climate change, right? You could probably make this list. Homelessness, crime, COVID-19, or any future pandemics. How about the rise of artificial intelligence? That seems to be an issue today. LGBTQ from both sides. Abortion, reproductive rights, again, from both sides. Maybe it's just gender identity, gender equality. Out-of-control immigration. Or maybe let's go closer to home. Maybe it's just drugs and violence here, or a culture of blame, a lack of accountability in people. Or maybe it's the fact that people are unwilling to make social commitments anymore, both inside the church and outside the church. Maybe it's the entertainment obsession, the media obsession. Do you know that TikTok has 1.5 billion users? And the problem, of course, is that in that entire list of things that I just listed off, not everybody cares equally about all of them. They're not all of equal importance. And to exacerbate this, we live in a culture of extremes, where you are either all in on something or you are all not. Let me give you an example. Let me pick one I did not list. Gun rights. I grew up in Canada. Now, I grew up in Western Canada, where guns were a normal part of life, but they were used for hunting. We had a bunch of them in our house. But I didn't see a handgun till I moved to the U.S. live, ever. And then I came down here, and people were all about gun rights, and they're banging the drum on gun rights, and I thought, who cares? You have a gun to shoot a deer. What else do you need, right? Now, some of you are already irritated at me. He's like, no, it's an American right to kill people. No, I'm kidding, okay? But you know what I mean? It's an issue that for some people is near and dear, and to someone who comes from outside the culture, like, I don't really care one way or the other. And what problem we run into is that every single one of us is convinced that the things we think are important are the things that are important. And it's not consistent. It's not consistent in the church, and it's not consistent outside the church. So what does it mean to understand the times? It means to seek the why beneath the what. I want you to listen to something Jesus said. It's very interesting. He was talking to the crowds that followed him, and you got to picture the crowds around Jesus. What they saw in culture was that they were being occupied by the Romans. They were not a free state. They knew everything that was going on wasn't the way it's supposed to be. They had heard all the prophecies about a Messiah, so they had a definite picture of the way society should be. They had a picture of what was going to happen when the Messiah came, and how he was going to free them from the Romans, and he was going to restore rule. They had a very clear picture, politically, socially, and spiritually, of what it was going to look like. And when Jesus was talking to him, here's what he said. He said to the crowd, when you see a cloud rising in the west, immediately say, it's going to rain, and it does. When the south wind blows, you say it's going to be hot, and it is. Hypocrites. You know how to interpret the appearance of the earth and the sky. How is it that you do not know how to interpret this present time? Despite everything they knew, they failed to make the connection between Jesus and his call to follow him. They missed the Messiah. The very thing they're looking for, the good news of the kingdom of God, they completely missed it, even when it was right in front of them. Because it was new, it was different, and it was not what they wanted or expected. And it is really easy for us to judge them, isn't it? But their issue was the interpretation of the events of the day. That's what Jesus is challenging them. He says, look, you guys aren't understanding. You see what's out there and you have your interpretation of events and you're not getting it. You're missing what's going on with me. So, what does that mean for us? You know that people around you and all the things that I listed before and all those things that are happening, people are simply living consistently with their fallen nature. Do you ever think that? It's not like they're being crazy. We are fallen without Jesus, and we have this fallen nature. The things that are happening are logical results. They're consistent. But here's what's interesting. With all that, do you know there's some things that are still true? People still desire to matter. They still want to belong. They want to find security. They're image bearers of God. These things are always true. But what happens is, because we live in a fallen world, it's pursued, all those things are pursued apart from God, right? You know this, right? There's this narcissistic bent to our society that puts the focus on me, which means I'm going to find all my meaning and all my significance in me, in what I want. And we're relativistic. We're a postmodern society that says truth is a movable goal. No one's opinion is more valuable than anybody else's, and truth is whatever's currently in vogue. Whatever makes me feel good about myself. Why? Because there's a fear and a hopelessness that is prevalent in society. You know, the focus in the USA in particular is on consumerism. It's this hedonistic approach to more stuff, to feeling better because I have everything I need for my retirement. I have more pleasure because, you know what, life's temporary and I want to be happy. I want to feel good, so I'll just pursue whatever that looks like. And throw in the whole mix that religion has been abused and misused, and religion has done the abusing and the misusing. And families are broken, and trust in leadership, in government, and in church has been lost. And so people are saying, hey, I'm going to take care of myself. Everybody has everything at their fingertips all the time. Connections are made digitally. Work from home, right? It's an all-time high. 8 out of 10 people, I can't believe it's that low, have a smartphone. Right? With all the connections. But you know what's underneath that? People still desire connection. They still want to belong. So understanding the times means not just looking at what's happening, but to say, why is this happening? Why is this going on? Why is there this rise in crime? Why is it that we're having these problems with kids? Why have the lack of commitment occurred? Why are people watching church from home? Why is there this rise in the LGBTQ agenda? Why? There's something underneath all of that that drives the behavior. But that leads us to the second. As we do that, we need to filter all of that through the heart of the Father. See, the reason that when Jesus is talking to these people, the reason they missed the Messiah, because they missed what God was doing and what God wanted. They didn't understand it. They were so consumed with being God's people and conquering the world, honestly, as God's people, that they missed that God cared deeply not just for them, but for everybody else. So how do you do this? I mean, how do you filter through the heart of the Father? A couple things come out of this. One is we have to know, first of all, where culture diverges from God's design. We have to understand, well, what did God design this to be? What is the world supposed to be like? How are we supposed to live? What does that look like in God's design? What was his plan? And can I say this all to you? Because you guys all get this. I don't have to convince you, but you can use this for your conversations with other people. Complaining is not understanding. We know that. lamenting what it should be. Oh, I can't believe these world is just so bad. Kids should be more respectful. People should be in church every Sunday. People should be smart enough to vote X, Y. People should just get a job and get off drugs, right? That's not understanding the times. That's just complaining. No. Filter through the heart of the Father. Okay, I understand. Here's where it diverges. Here's where it does not line up with what God's doing. But remember, people are never the enemy, ever, in our culture. And if you want to understand the culture, understanding the culture is not pinpointing your enemies. It's understanding what is going on beneath, because people are never your enemy. Satan is your enemy and what he's doing. Do you remember when Jesus was born in the Christmas story? Do you remember what the angel said to the shepherds? I bring you good tidings of great joy, which shall be for all people. Not some of the people, not this half of the people, not only people that are like this, all people. And the reason this is so important is when we're understanding the times, is Jesus saying, look, you guys need to understand the times. He says you need to be recentered. You got to recenter on who God is and who Jesus is. Because when we do that, it shapes our priorities, it shapes how we respond. Because the root issues at any time in history are always centered on the heart issues of the people. And actually, if we truly understand and do this, remember that people aren't the enemy, it actually takes us away from that complaining spirit. And then we connect our world view and what we're hearing to the good news of Jesus. Because no matter how the problems come out, whether it's now or in the year 1490 or in the year 600 AD, whatever the problems are, they're always connected to the truth of who Jesus is. Let me give you an example. In our world where truth is relative, what does Jesus say about himself? I am the truth. There's a truth about who Jesus is that cuts through all this truth and relativism. He's a beautiful picture of what truth and life look like. Or think about the one that's a hot topic for a lot of churches, is the whole LGBTQ and what we should do about this. Do you know that what's underneath all of that is a desire to belong? A desire to have an identity that matters. To have a purpose. And Jesus says, I bring identity and purpose. Me. The greatest identity, the greatest purpose, the greatest belonging, it comes from me. We have homelessness. It's rampant everywhere, poverty. And Jesus says, I care deeply for them. My people are the way that I demonstrate that through their actions and their finances. When we filter our understanding of the times through the good news of the gospel, it means we can understand the times without ever being fearful. Because we don't need to be. Filter through the heart of the Father. And then last, pay attention to where God is moving. If we want to understand the times, it's not just about understanding the negative, it's about understanding the good of what God is doing. The people in Jesus' time, like we already said, they completely missed what God was doing. There was a time in the midst of this when Jesus healed on the Sabbath. If you're familiar with the New Testament, right, you've heard this story, right? And he healed on the Sabbath. It went against the establishment. It went against the religious leaders. They said it shouldn't be like this. Their understanding of faith, of God, it went against that. And they protested Jesus' actions. They said, why are you doing this? He made this very interesting statement. He says, so, because Jesus was doing these things on the Sabbath, the Jewish leaders began to persecute him. And in his defense, Jesus said to them, my Father is always at his work to this very day, and I too am working. Now, did you catch the implication? Like, God is always at work. We all agree with that, right? We nod, we say, absolutely, God's at work. We say that all the time. He's never absent. He's never inactive. But there's an implication of what God is saying here, which is the thing that happened that everybody around him said, that's not right, that goes against the law of God, you shouldn't do it, was God at work. Which means the most learned people of the day, who knew the most about God, they knew their scriptures the best, looked at something and said, that's wrong, and Jesus said, no. That's where God's working. This is what he's doing, and I'm with him. . It means no matter what we see, no matter what's going on in society, no matter what's happening, no matter how much we might dislike the trends that are happening, God is working, and it might be different than we think. And when we look to understand the times, we're seeking to understand the why beneath the what and filter this understanding, through the good news of Jesus. What we can be confident in it is that God's at work. He's doing something. He's not caught off guard by all this. He's not bothered by any of this stuff. He says, I got it. Let's go back. Check, check. There we go. Nice. So we're going to go back here and look at the men of Issachar. All the way back at the beginning. Remember we said there was two things they did. It was men who understood the times and knew what Israel should do. Right? They need to understand what's going on. You have to filter what's coming through the way that you understand the world. And we're saying you got to do that through the lens of the good news of Jesus and understanding what's going on underneath the surface. But it should lead us to action. Because our actions then need to be influenced by our understanding. Think about the logic behind all this, right? What we're being said here is the world is constantly changing, but God is at work, and the good news of Jesus still applies today. So how do I live in response to everything that's happening around me? And we're not going to spend a lot of time here because this is going to the subject of the next 3 weeks. But Paul had the same thing. He was writing to the church in Rome. And he said, look, guys, the commandments, they're all summed up in this one command, just like Jesus said. Love your neighbor as yourself. Love does no harm to a neighbor. Therefore, love is the fulfillment of the law. And then look what he says. Do this, understanding the present time. In other words, in all that's going on, as you understand, love other people. Do you know that the early church, for the first 300 years of their existence, did only 4 things to understand and to shape their culture? That was it. Do you know what they were? They prayed. God, this is all yours. And they saw him continuously. They proclaimed, which was basically saying, we want to tell you about this Jesus that gives you an identity, that gives you purpose, that gives you belonging, that invites you in. We're going to tell you all about him. He died for you. He forgave you. You just have to accept him. They served other people and said, we will pour our lives out for other people. And when no one got it, they suffered, and they said, we're suffering so that people see Jesus. That's it. That's all they did. And the church took over the world in 300 years. Understanding the times helps us respond effectively to them. Now, this may have raised some questions in your mind. Hopefully, we'll address those issues in the weeks ahead. We're going to take a look at how or if God adapts his methods over time. I mean, how does God work within culture? Does understanding the culture mean that we hold on to the past and do the way we always did, or does it mean we ignore the past or something else? What we're going to look at, what does it mean to adapt to the culture without compromising the message of the gospel? I mean, what's the difference then between people and systems? And then finally, we're going to take a look at the idea of what is the risk in pursuing the lead of God and responding to culture, and we're going to find out it's actually the least risky thing you can do. All of this is unbelievably relevant as we look to plant a missional outpost and to engage people with the truth of Jesus in a way that we've never done it before. So this week, as you watch the news or as you read your Facebook page or as you listen to your friends, here's what I want you to do. I want you to think of what is the why beneath the what. In other words, okay, I see that, that's irritating, but why is that happening? And you can't answer it because they're stupid. That's not a why, okay? That's a bad answer, right? What's really going on? You can't say it's because they're Republican or because they're Democrat. Like, just what's really going on beneath? Ask the why. And then say, so what is the heart of God the Father towards these people. And don't stop at the situation, because it's easy to say, well, God's against that because it's against the Bible. Okay, but what is God's heart for those people in the situation? And then see if you can spot where God is at work. And if you really want to be challenged, say, all right, God, how do I engage in this and respond in my heart or in my conversations with the good news of Jesus?